welcome to another episode of Politics Matters, how civics, politics, and law affect you here on AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota, and where you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Bruce Klopfleisch. Thanks for tuning into the show and supporting the station. If you have any questions or comments, you can email them to comment@am950radio.com. Couple of things before we get into the show. First of all, you probably noticed if you're a listener of the show that the music is going to be changing today. I mentioned that last week, how due to algorithms and policy changes at YouTube and all this sort of stuff, we're starting this week with some new music. So I'm hearing it for the first time as well as you. So if you got any feedback about the music, send it in. Another thing is this particular one that I'm taping right now. So I'm taping this Wednesday morning, and this runs on Saturday and Sunday, but this is my 100th show. So kind of a milestone one. So I've been doing this now for almost 2 years. I started in July 2 years ago. So we're coming up on the 2-year anniversary. So I want to take a moment to thank Chad Larson, the owner of the station, who took a chance and let me do the show. And also thanks to Brett and Patrick, the two producers of the show, for all their help in getting it out, this show out to you each week. So show number 100. So we're gonna keep it going here, but just wanted to note that milestone episode for this week. So the first topic I'm going to talk about is the so-called deal between Iran and the United States to end the war that the regime, says isn't really a war after all. Is it's an incursion or whatever word they used. Well, so again, I'm taping this Wednesday morning, so by the time the show airs, maybe something is going to change. Apparently, something might happen on Friday, like they were talking about maybe signing this what's called a memorandum of understanding on Friday. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. Who knows? But just a heads up that I am taping this a little, something can change by the time you hear this on the air. So I've said numerous times on this show, this is where I have my lawyer hat on, that there is no deal until you actually see something in writing, and it's signed by all of the participants affected by the deal. And I'm going to talk about that here in just a little bit, but this is one of the big problems with this so-called deal is I don't know that that's going to happen, where all the participants affected by the deal are actually going to sign off on it. And you hear this deal, Trump keeps saying all the time, "Oh, we got this deal. Iran wants to sign the deal. They really want a deal. They really want a deal." So he's basically been lying about this deal for the past, over 100 days now that we've been at this war. So, who knows what's really going to happen here. But, the actual deal itself might be quite different than what Trump is talking about as well. So again, this is why there is no deal until there's something actually in writing and all the parties affected by it sign off on it. So this is going to be a big hurdle, I think, for the regime. So, we'll see if this actually happens. Just remember that when everybody signs off on it, that doesn't mean that they're all going to follow it, right? There's been all kinds of, ceasefire agreements signed in the past that have been broken right away or within, very few days or something. So just because there's, let's assume that everybody does sign this, doesn't mean it won't get broken in a few days or a week or, whatever. So, that's certainly been happened in our history a lot, and in the history of, Lebanon and Israel and Hezbollah and Iran. So just because they sign it doesn't mean it's actually going to work out. So with that preface in mind, let's take a look at the deal or memorandum of understanding or whatever it is that they're calling it. First of all, this is not a deal to end the war itself. So at least what I've been seeing and reading about this understanding is that it's only a 60-day ceasefire. That's basically what it is. This is not an agreement to end the war itself. What this is the both parties and apparently Lebanon, Israel, and Hezbollah, I guess, are will be signing something, if it's signed, for a 60-day ceasefire. And then there will be further negotiations between Iran and the United States to resolve other things. So there is an expectation here that there's going to be further negotiations going on, particularly around Iran's nuclear capability and the sanctions against Iran that the United States has in place now. What's going to happen to those in the future? So there's all kinds of things that have not been resolved, which is, again, I don't think this is a deal. I would be surprised if this deal holds. But, this is apparently what's in it. So, but the big point here is it doesn't end the war. This is just a ceasefire for further negotiation. And then maybe that further negotiation will actually end the war. So, I wish the media would quit reporting it as, I've seen this, all kinds of headlines and stuff. Well, we have a peace deal to end the war. No, we don't. This is not a peace deal to end the war. It is a 60-day ceasefire, assuming people sign it. What's going to happen if no deal is made after the 60 days is up, which could very well happen? And then, let's say there is some deal. Is Israel going to agree to this deal? I have my suspicions about that. I'll get into that in a little bit here. But so the big part of this deal, I guess, is that the Strait of Hormuz will open back up once this deal is signed. So, we'll have to see if that really happens. But let's assume that it does. There's going to be a problem with that. Will Iran continue to regulate the traffic that goes through the Strait of Hormuz? I mean, they're doing that now. Are they going to keep doing it? Do the ships that go through the Strait of Hormuz have to pay money to Iran like they are now in order to get through there? I have seen and heard some things from the Iranian negotiators that have said that they might make people pay a, quote, fee, close quote, for going through the Strait of Hormuz. So that part in and of itself is not clear. Shocking, I know. In a Trump deal, it's not clear what's really going to happen with the Strait of Hormuz, other than apparently they're going to open it up. But still, like, what is the procedure going to be to get through there? Who knows? Trump apparently is also going to agree to lift the United States blockade on Iranian ports that are currently in place. So that, that's a win for Iran, where they're going to get their ports back and be able to do more trading. So part of the agreement is also apparently, again, I use the word apparently because we haven't seen anything in actual writing or signed by the parties. Iran will neither produce nor acquire nuclear weapons. And I'll remind people that this is something that Iran has said for years. This was in Obama's deal that Trump tore up twice, by the way. First in his first term and now in the second term. So, Trump is commenting about that this is that they would go in and retrieve the nuclear material, quote, when all is calm, close quote. Well, what does that mean? What does all is calm mean? When is that going to be occurring? Plus, how are you going to get it? And what nuclear material are you talking about? Again, all of this is not laid out in the memorandum of understanding. All these specific details that need to be in there are not in there. I mean, it's no surprise that the deal that Obama had took, I think it was like 2 years for the parties to negotiate. And Trump thinks he's going to do this in like 60 days. Come on. The odds of that happening are not very good because there are a lot of details to work out here. So same with, inspections. Trump says that there would be, quote, strong inspections. Well, what does that mean? There's no timetable. There's no nothing. Well, what does strong inspections mean? Who knows? Again, details. Trump loves to talk and say these, vague words, but there's no details. The United States also apparently will be agreeing not to add any new sanctions on Iran, during the 60 days. And the United States would waive oil sanctions against Iran for a specified period, whatever that means, and after the final deal. So here again, Iran's getting what it wants, right? All these sanctions it has is going to be lifted. And then curiously, and this is one of those details where, I don't know if this is going to happen, but part of this deal is apparently that all United States and United Nations sanctions would be lifted on Iran. So apparently the United Nations has some sanctions. Has anybody talked to the United Nations about giving these up? I haven't heard about that. The Security Council is the organization that's going to need to approve the lifting of sanctions. Let's remember a couple of the countries on that Security Council, China and Russia. Are they going to approve this deal? I don't know. Also, in another example of how Iran is, cleaning our clock in this agreement, the United States is agreeing to release I've seen two different numbers. I've seen 24 billion. I've seen 25 billion in Iran's frozen assets. So I'm just going to go with 25 because it's easier to remember. So Iran, we're going to give Iran $25 billion of their, assets back. So do you remember when the Republicans got all riled up when Obama paid Iran $1.7 billion of their own money to get as part of the deal with Iran? And by the way, Iran did not have any nuclear weapons. There's no evidence. And even our own intelligence agency said there was no evidence Iran has a war or has a nuclear warhead, despite what Trump and his sycophants claim. That was not the case as a justification for this war. So, hey, are they going to go out on Fox Lies and whine and complain about this $25 billion? No, of course they won't, because their king is the one that's doing it. So it must be okay. Right? If Trump says so, well, it must be okay. But when Obama does it for a lot less money, they whine and they moan about that. So, another area that to keep watch on is the United States may pay. Now, this part would be our own money. It looks like the U.S. and maybe some other countries are going to pay more money to help Iran reconstruct itself after all the bombing that we in Israel did on it. So there's going to be a reconstruction and development plan for Iran. And the number that I've seen for that is $300 billion at least. That's the starting point. $300 billion. Now, where are they going to get that money from? I'll talk about money in another episode in this show, but apparently we have, arguably at least, again, we don't know what this until we see the details, but we and maybe other countries, but we don't know because there's no details, are going to be paying Iran $300 billion to rebuild it. So, this is another one of those things, but that's going to be negotiated during the 60 days. So, where's this money going to come from? And here again, this looks like another win for Iran here. What about Israel and Lebanon and Hezbollah, right? Iran says that Israel is going to stop the bombing of Lebanon. That has to be part of this deal. And Hezbollah has to, stop bombing. Because they're the ones that are bombing Israel. It's not Lebanon itself. So, Israel has already come out and said, well, our military is going to remain in these security zones that we already have in Lebanon, Syria, and Gaza. That part's not addressed in the deal so far. Well, why isn't it? Well, because Israel, Lebanon, and Hezbollah are not a part of the deal. Right? This is a big problem with this deal is do you think Bibi Netanyahu is going to come out and say, yeah, we're going to stop bombing Lebanon? I haven't heard that. I haven't heard Hezbollah come out and say, yeah, we're going to stop bombing Israel. I haven't heard that. This is a big problem with this so-called agreement. A few other things. What about the United States forces in Iran and, other bases around the region? Like what's going to happen there? Are they going to go away? Are we going to add more? And what about all the bases, of ours in the area that got bombed by Iran? That's going to be a cost to us taxpayers to rebuild those. Again, this is like money wasted by this administration. They're getting basically nothing out of this deal that wasn't in place before they bombed Iran. And, they're making it sound like this is a great deal for the United States. No, it's not. We're going to be spending so much money on this. So, the bottom line here is that the war is not over. The ceasefire may not hold. So far, at least, Israel and Hezbollah aren't a party to this deal. So they can continue bombing if they want. This has not been a good deal for the United States. You've heard nothing in here about a regime change. I mean, we went in there and we killed basically the royal family and some of the head leaders of the regime, but the leader's son took over, and that's no regime change. So we didn't get that. We're paying higher prices for gas and various other things that got stuck in the Strait of Hormuz. Inflation is going up in the United States. We spent billions of dollars. Estimates are $1 billion a day. Again, I think it's more than that. And we've been doing this for over 100 days now. So that's at least over $100 billion wasted for what? Iran now knows that it can close the Strait of Hormuz basically when it wants to. They still have a military, despite what Trump says. I mean, they shot down one of our helicopters, and they've put all kinds of mines out in the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, they got a military still, and they're going to get billions of dollars back. Who's getting the better deal here? Looks like Iran, but I didn't expect. I expected nothing less from the Trump administration, who are run by incompetent people who have no real experience in international negotiations to end a war. I mean, we got two real estate guys negotiating this so-called deal. What could go wrong? All right, so time will tell about this. I'm sure this isn't the last time I'm going to be talking about this deal. But coming back on the other side of the break, we're going to talk about an update about income and wealth inequality that's going on. So we'll talk about that on the other side of the break here on the Politics Matter Show. All right, welcome back to another segment here on the Politics Matter Show. How civics, politics, and law affect you here on AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota. I'm your host, Bruce Klopfleisch. Again, thanks for supporting the show on the station. This is my 100th show, so thanks for supporting the show. So next up, we're going to be talking about a subject that I've talked periodically about before, and this is income and wealth inequality in the United States. So there were a couple of things that happened this week that just shows you how this thing just continues to get worse. And in doing so, we certainly have risks to our economy taking a nosedive. I've said before that, there's certain economists predicting recessions and things like that. Well, I already think we are in a recession, even though we don't technically meet some of the guidelines to declare it as such. So item number one is that Elon Musk is now the first trillionaire in the world. So I mentioned on previous shows that I predicted that this would happen, and and so many other people, that Musk was going to be the first trillionaire. Well, now that has happened, thanks to taking his SpaceX company public on the U.S. stock exchange. So he's now the first trillionaire. As I mentioned before, in the United States, we also have roughly, and I checked this number the other day just to make sure it's a rough number, but we have roughly 1,000 billionaires now in the United States. Now, if you listen to Republicans whine and complain about, all these high tax states, all the billionaires are going to leave and move to Republican states and all this sort of stuff. You've heard that before. Well, it so happens, and I just checked it just for the heck of it here, that the top two states so they have the most billionaires in their states are California and New York. They're the top two. And then Florida is number 3, and Texas is number 4. So all this whining by Republicans about rich people fleeing these Democratic states with the high taxes and, all this baloney is just not supported by the data. As I've said before, the billionaires are going to stay where they are because they're billionaires. That's where they've made enough money to call themselves billionaires. They're not going to leave and go somewhere else and risk losing their billions. They're going to stay where they're at. That's what their brand is at. So this whole line about, rich people are going to flee. It's just, no, that's not how it works. But, having our first trillionaire is not something to brag about, although I'm sure Musk is bragging about it. Quite the opposite, actually. Does the world really need a trillionaire? Of course not. But we do. So all the more reason to have a wealth tax. A number of countries are now doing something like that, and the United States should be doing it as well. But, we won't if the Republicans are in charge, because they want more trillionaires. They want more billionaires so that they can get their money for their campaigns. That's how it works. So that's one item this week that I saw was, we now have our trillionaire. You juxtapose that against the Bureau of Labor Statistics reporting that the increase in energy prices, in part because of the Iran war, had wiped out a year and a half of wage gains for the average American worker. So in May, inflation rose 4.2%. Have your wages gone up over 4.2%? For many people, that answer is no. So if you're one of those people, your wage gain is decreasing and it's costing you more money to pay your bills because inflation is going up more than your wages are. So it's going to cost you more money. So it's not really surprising when you look at the polling about the economy that the regime is way underwater. I've gone through those numbers before, and I'm sure I'll be doing it again here before the election. Because most people just don't think that the United States economy is working for them, and with good reason, by the way. The top 0.01% of the economy, of the wealthy people, and the top 1% of the people continue to get richer at the expense of the 99%. And by the way, included in those 99% probably are, maybe close to billion or millionaires. Because we're getting so many now. But for the rest of us, many young people are foregoing buying a house. They're not having kids. They're not getting married. They're not saving for retirement simply because they can't afford it in our economy. And even some older people can't do that. And it's looking like this particular, young person's generation is going to be making less money than their parents' generation did, which hasn't happened in our economy in a long time, but it looks like it's going to be happening now. So even though income and wealth inequality is not a new feature in the United States, this explosion of money to the very rich, is the highest that it's ever been. So, lots of people like to look back and say, well, go back to the Gilded Age, which is roughly in the 1890s, early 1900s, back in, that time. Where if you go back there, the richest people in the United States owned about the equivalent of 3% of the country's economic output. Today, the top 20 richest people in the United States, so we're narrowing this down to just the top 20 richest people in the United States, they now have roughly 12% of the economic output of our economy. So that number has gone 4 times higher now since the Gilded Age. So it's getting worse and worse and worse. And it's going to continue to unless there's some changes made to our political system. And again, this is something I think the Democrats, you got to run on this. You got to run on the 99% versus the 1%. We know who the Republicans support. Democrats, you got to come out and support the other group there. So for many Americans, their wealth is their, home and their retirement accounts. These are what they use for investment purposes. And then on day-to-day, things, that's what their income from a job is, assuming they're working. Again, not everybody works. But that's how, a lot of people pay their, day-to-day expenses is from the income that they get from their job. And then they hope to have some investments for later on in life. So the share of national income going to workers has been trending down for years. So it hit a record low in the first quarter of this year. So it hit a record low under Trump 2.0. Again, big shock. This higher inflation and lower growth rate, takes a long-term toll on our economy. So where is this money going, from the working class? Well, of course, it's going to the rich people. Right? And I think more and more people, and I think more and more Republicans are starting to figure this out. They are realizing how unfair this economic system is to them. And a growing number of people want the government to do something about it because they're having a harder and harder time getting by. Rich people, they can absorb higher costs to them a lot easier than poor people can. Which is one reason why the rich people keep getting richer. And, let's not forget the, average American has an increased debt load. Not the rich. I've talked before about how the rich, a lot of the rich people keep staying rich. But the average American person, they have a higher debt load. So they got higher medical debt. I'll talk about that later. Credit card debt is now at a record high in the United States. Student loan debt is at a record high. Lots of people have higher mortgage debt. I'm not sure if that's at a record high. People are getting more personal loans, just to pay off their other debts they got, or, to buy a car or something. So just the debt load for the, average person in the United States is getting higher and higher and higher, which also widens the income inequality or wealth inequality gap. So the credit card debt is now at 1.37 trillion. I just checked that yesterday. So for the average, or for the each card holder in the United States to pay that off, so everybody who has a credit card in the United States would have to pay $8,341 to make up that debt. I think a lot of credit card holders in the United States don't have $8,341 to pony up to pay that debt off. So again, this debt is going to keep getting higher and higher and higher, because that's what a lot of people are living off right now. Now that inflation's so high and your energy costs are going up and all those other kinds of things that we talked previously about. Guess what else is going up? The delinquency rate, meaning people not paying their debts. That's what delinquency means. That rate is also going up to, we're approaching the level during the Great Recession. And it's the delinquency rates are going up on most debts, not just one like credit cards. I mean, it's credit cards and mortgages and medical debt and all kinds of debt. People just can't pay it all off. Bankruptcy filings are up by 12% in the past year. By the way, medical debt is the number one reason for people filing for bankruptcy. This amounts to 594,891 people filing for bankruptcy in a year. So that's an annual number there. Nearly 600,000 people in the United States are filing for bankruptcy. I also checked the poverty number in the United States. 37 million, roughly. I think it's a little over that, the number that I saw, but they live in poverty in this country. 37 million. Health insurance, which I'll talk about in the next segment. Over 27 million people don't have health insurance. Those were the numbers, I think, that were kind of close to what it was before the Affordable Care Act was passed. Well, now that the Republicans killed the subsidy in the Affordable Care Act, we're getting more and more people uninsured. The top 1% of Americans' wealth now is over $20.2 million for each of them. Right, so that's the average of the top 1% in the United States. While the bottom 50%, their average is just over $35,000. Let me repeat that. The average wealth in the top 1% in the United States is over 20.2 million. While the bottom half of us is just over 35,000. How fair is that? You can see why people are getting upset. You can see that the income and wealth inequality of this country is just horrible, and it continues to get worse. A couple other things involved here. Let's not forget that unemployment's probably going to go up. Some of these people who are making, in some of these jobs, in the bottom 50%, maybe even in above that, they're going to be losing their jobs to AI. So what are they going to do? This is going to increase our numbers. This is going to increase people living on credit cards, etc., if they can't find another job. Or alternatively, let's there's people out there talking about, well, this AI thing is going to bust, right? Well, when that happens, the stock market is going to take a dive, and then people who have investments in the stock markets in their retirement accounts, they're going to lose money. So depending on whether AI takes people's jobs or takes their retirement accounts, it's not going to be a good thing. It may be great for the rich people, but it ain't going to be good news for us. So, of course, part of what's going on and creating this inequality is politics, right? I've talked about that before, where the rich get what they want, a lot of times from the politicians, especially when the Republicans are in charge like they are now. So, they got their tax cut. They got their regulation cuts. And let's be frank, they get some of this when the Democrats are in charge too. And it's because we have legalized bribery in this country. So I went and I checked. In the United States Senate, there's 100 senators, right? How many of those you think are millionaires? So Patrick, take a guess. In the people in the United States Senate, how many of them do you think are millionaires?
96.
Oh, no. No, I would have guessed something high like that too. But 73 are millionaires. So, let's round that up to 75. So that's 3/4 of the United States senators are millionaires. The median net worth of people in the Senate right now is 4.4 million, which is more than 70 times the median U.S. household net worth. So it's not really a surprise, is it, that the rich get what they want and we don't? So then I went over to the House of Representatives and looked. Now, there's 435 members of the House, right? So it's a little harder to pinpoint an actual number here because there's so many of them. But the consistent number that I saw when I looked at this was over 230 members. So it's still a majority of the House are millionaires. It didn't used to be this way, right? But this is what money does in politics, right? It takes a lot of money to run for office. Lots of people don't have the money to run for office. Who has the money for run for office? Millionaires.
Yeah, somewhere around 50% was what I was thinking. Since the House is a little less prestigious, and of course, as you said, there were many more. I'm thinking, maybe 50, not like 75% like the Senate.
Right. But that number's growing over the years. So, you can see how our politicians, our government, and the stuff that they pass is helping this gap as well. So I went back and I looked at the Citizens United decision in 2010, right? This was the Supreme Court decision that legalized bribery of politicians. So I went back to 2024, the presidential election. There were about 300 billionaire families that donated $3 billion themselves to the election. So that's an average of $10 million each, which is roughly 100,000 times greater than the average election donation, for the rest of us, which is $100. So their average was 10 million each. So, you see how this works, right? And you wonder why rich people have more power in our government. Well, this is a big reason why. And they get a lot of money from the government, right? They get all these government contracts, they get all these subsidies, they get all these tax breaks. They love working with the government because they're making money at it. And this is why a lot of these guys, mostly guys, I think, give money to both parties because they want to keep the status quo. But they give more money to Republicans when they actually look at the numbers. But, the Democrats, they get their money too. So this is all the more reason why we need a wealth and a tax in this country and raise income tax even more for the rich people. Not to mention getting rid of the Social Security cap. So for somebody who's making $1 million, they're only paying Social Security tax on $184,500 in 2026. Once they hit that cap, they don't pay no more. Most of us don't hit that cap. So we're paying a higher percentage of our income to that tax than they are. Right. So it's no wonder why the Americans think that the economy is rigged against them. It's designed to increase the wealth of the super rich, and they take it from the rest of us. It's no longer creating opportunities and stability for the majority of us as it should be. So, the Democrats, you really need to run on this in the election coming up. And let's say you get into power, you got to start, passing actual policies to address this, not just nipping it on the edge, but you got to make real structural changes. All right, when we come back, I'm going to talk about healthcare because we got problems there too. So we'll talk about that on the other side of the break here on the Politics Matter Show. All right, welcome back to the Politics Matter Show, how civics, politics, and law affect you here on AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota. So for most of us, right, healthcare is an issue that does affect all of us. And this issue came to my attention when I was watching a video about how a Republican member of the House in Nebraska by the name of Mike Flood, he's a Republican in a reliably Republican seat. He had a town hall, and a person at the town hall asked about, well, would you support a bill for Medicare for all, for working and retired people? So notice that this person did not say for everybody. He kind of framed it as if you're working or if you're a retired person. So, this happens all the time at these town halls where in the Republican, he gave the standard Republican answer of, well, no, because we can't afford it. Right. This is the standard answer that they give. Well, the boos came raining down on him. Again, this is not some liberal area here in Nebraska. This is Republican areas, and they were booing him for that answer. So remember when I mentioned in the last segment about all the millionaires in the House? Well, this guy's one of them. His wealth is estimated at $8.2 million. So here we have another millionaire in Congress saying, we can't afford better health care for you. Even though he gets the best health care, but how is it again that we don't have the same coverage as our representatives do in healthcare? I mean, you'd think at least we could get that. No, they get the best healthcare. We get the crappiest. So here's another millionaire saying, hey, sorry, we can't afford this. So, I think more and more people are not buying this argument about, oh, we can't afford it, especially when they see how this Republican regime is wasting and abusing taxpayer money. Right? They see the regime paying $13 million on the reflecting pool, and now there's algae growing in it. And now you see, literally, you saw people dumping hydrogen peroxide into it. Part of the problem here is they sealed that reflecting pool. They shouldn't have done that, and I don't think that the peroxide is going to take care of the problem. Science, something they don't, think about or care about. But they also see the United States government spending over $100 billion on a useless war with Iran. That's going to get us nothing. Billions of dollars, spent for a ballroom that we don't need. Millions on a UFC fight at the White House that we didn't need to do. All that foreign aid that goes to Israel to help Israel fund their universal healthcare system. Israel can have one, but we can't. It's just too expensive for us. It's just too expensive for the government. So, the working class, we have to end up paying more. Isn't that how it works for all this stuff? But people just are just not buying it anymore. And this includes Republicans, by the way. So sticking with healthcare, right? If the United States adopted a Medicare for all system, it would actually save the United States money. And why the Democrats are not saying this more and more and more, I don't know why, but they should. There's been a bunch of studies out there that it would save us 13 to 15% in healthcare spending. That's about 450 to 650 billion a year we would save under that system. That's $2 to $5 trillion over a decade. But no, we can't. According to Republicans, we can't afford that. Who wants to save money anyway? Come on. Also, this type of a Medicare for All program would save around 68,000 lives a year. But, we can't have that. We can't afford that. Who cares about those 68,000 people that are going to die because they don't have a good health insurance? Who cares about them, right? I mean, Republicans' politics are literally killing us, but they're okay with it. Oh, we just can't afford to do that. And part of the problem here, right, is if we did a Medicare for All system, lots of the private health insurance companies would go away, as their campaign dollars would go away. And of course, many of those companies are major donors for Republicans and some Democrats too. So this is another reason why we have to get money out of politics, right? Because if we were able to do that, we'd have a lot better chance at getting this Medicare for All system or some kind of a single payer system, right? Whatever form you want to call it. This is how, we got to get money out of politics for this to happen. And if you want to buy your own private healthcare, fine. Let's put that in the system too. If you got enough money and you can afford private healthcare insurance, fine, go ahead. Let's keep a couple of those companies around, private healthcare, but this is the problem. And they have so much political clout now, and they have so much influence on the government now, these private healthcare insurance companies. That's the tough part. It's not a surprise that a lot of the millionaires and billionaires in our country are healthcare insurance executives and CEOs, right? That's not a real surprise. So the Democrats, you need to make this more of a priority. Get out there and start talking about how, a Medicare for All system would save us money. That's what people want to hear, right? And it would cost you less money. You wouldn't have to be paying all these premiums and co-pays and all this other crap in our system. And you wouldn't have to let the insurance companies make the decision about what treatments you get either. We can't afford that though. We can afford $1 trillion a year military budget, but we can't afford Medicare for All. I mean, it's just ludicrous. But this is another example of how politics affects you. And you need to get involved in it more to get what you want. And I think a lot more people are starting to do that here. So, all right, that's the end of today's show. We'll talk to you next week.